Hey everybody, and welcome to TNM Coaching Unplugged and Zoran Todorovic Interconnected Podcast. We're so grateful and so delighted and happy that you're with us. We're so grateful that you're liking us, referring us. We're growing with you. So thank you so much for listening to this podcast where you elevate your heart, elevate your soul, your mind to the next level and beyond. This podcast is dedicated to the cutting edge human development, leadership, personal transformation, and growth. I'm your host, Zoran Todorovic. I'm a Master Certified Coach, founder of TNM Coaching. And today we have a very special guest, very special elevation. I'm so excited, to talk about this topic of supporting men to become the best possible version of themselves, growing men to help them to break through emotional blocks, dismantle limiting belief system, reconnecting to a deeper truth as well, getting men to become men in the most beautiful version of themselves. And today I'm joined with Michelle Cachucho. I love her surname. I was just talking to her like this. It's such a lovely surname. You cannot forget that, right? Cachucho. You must go to LinkedIn and search her there. She's a transformational coach, intuitive guide, leader. She has developed powerful methods to help men break through, as I said, emotional blocks, dismantle old belief systems, and reconnect to themselves. And today we're going to be talking about Mish's journey into working with men, because I think it's very special when you have a powerful woman like herself showing up as guide for men. I think this is super interesting. We're going to also talk about anatomy of miracle, and how she developed this concept to help people transform their lives and to help men become better version of themselves, how we can overcome our limiting stories, how we can overcome our traumas, how we can move from disconnection to connection, and so on and so forth. We'll see when this wonderful podcast takes us. I'm so super excited to have Mish on the call today. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, Zoran, wowzers. That's an intro and a half. So I feel very blessed. Thank you. And it's always great to hang out with you. So thanks for having me.
Yeah. And I really meant every word that I said, when it comes to how interesting it is that you are the guide. So tell me, let's start with that, because a lot of the men, executives, business owners, startup managers, people who are working with, improving their life, men from all walks of life that I know are listening to this podcast are going to be very curious. How come you decided to show up as a guide, way shower, mentor, coach for men? What was the story? What is the background? How do you arrive to this point?
Yeah, so it's interesting, Zoran, because I was as surprised as much as anyone. So I've been in the kind of personal development world, or at least interested in personal development and just human behavior. It's probably, I'd like to say, like 10 years old. And I know that sounds wild, but I remember driving in the car with my dad. And he would be listening to these like Tony Robbins tapes. And it's like, do your best, like positivity, all this sort of stuff. And I was in the car like, what is this? Like, and my dad was, he ran many businesses and sold property. I originally grew up in South Africa. And so I got interested in that space of kind of humanness, And so I then started my waking up journey in 2010, just having moved from South Africa and all of that. And I landed up starting a business in spiritual development and going in and out of corporate back and forth. But ultimately, in 23, when my dad transitioned, he kind of left us. It was a crazy time after he had a stroke. And I remember kind of sitting in a session. I kind of do my own kind of healing sessions with clients and obviously my own work as well. I do this work as well. And I remember coming to a limiting belief, which blew my mind. And it was this. I remember this memory, and I was 6 years old, and I'd asked my dad, hey, Dad, come and swim with me. I was in South Africa. We grew up in South Africa, and swimming was a big thing. And it was a Saturday. And in my mind as a kid, I was like, definitely Dad's going to come swim. It's a weekend. Why wouldn't he? And he turned to me and he said, Mish, I can't. I have to go work. And like in that moment, as that 6-year-old, I kind of got this limiting belief that Dad chose money over me. And that kind of sat with me for the rest of my life, as it turns out. And what I figured out was that limiting belief was blocking me from money, blocking me from so many other things. And when I realized that, and when my dad transitioned, when he left, I felt like something had left me. I felt quite insecure in the world. And what I then realized as well is that it wasn't that I didn't feel safe around men, but I had that program that I hadn't felt safe. And so all of a sudden I started to come into this world around men and started speaking to more and more men. And then I started to hear folks had men's group. They said their men's groups were broken. I started interviewing men saying, well, we don't have a space to even be emotional. We're not allowed to be. And so all my work that I'd been doing for many years in the personal development space took this crazy ass turn. And like, I think it's absurd to think that I'm going to teach men how to be men. That's absurd. I'm not here to do that. But what I can do is help men kind of connect into those deeper places. And the main modality I do use is compassion. And I think compassion is one of the most beautiful kind of modalities I've learned how to use. And the transformation that comes from that, and I use it myself, but with men especially, it's incredibly powerful to allow that space for whatever challenge, limiting belief, or pain needs to be seen. And when we kind of drop into those deep spaces, after that, you just watch men literally transform. And it's been a real honor and privilege to start doing this work. And so here I am. It's like I'm as surprised as everyone else, truly.
I mean, and how wonderful it is when life kind of gets you to the places where you need to be and you're surprised by life. I like that, like nothing is predictable in this world. And sometimes when we open up and we allow ourselves to get into our life journey, then the surprise is there. Like, hey, this is what you're supposed to do and this is what you're meant to do. Mm. And it's beautiful connection to your dad and how that shaped. And I love what you said so far, that this limiting belief actually, when you recognized what it was, that it really unblocked a lot of things in your life. So it's very important for audience to bookmark this, that sometimes when we find that one thing, right, from our childhood, that it can really create this amazing effect in our life. So you mentioned compassion. So tell me more about how do you guide men into this space of compassion? And I love, what you're saying about compassion, but I'm just also curious, what needs to happen, for example, for somebody to be able to feel compassion, to become compassionate about themselves, to break through into that field? What would you say?
Yeah. So I've also often considered this, like, how the hell did I land up with compassion? It's such a strange thing to consider for me. And when people have asked me this, I immediately think about the days of growing up back in South Africa. Have you heard of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, Zoran, that was led by Nelson Mandela and Archbishop Tutu, yeah?
Yes.
And so for folks who haven't heard about that, what that was Archbishop Desmond Tutu. He was a kind of religious leader. I'm not too religious, but he was a kind of religious leader in South Africa. And you obviously had Nelson Mandela. He had come out of prison. And what they had done is they started these Truth and Reconciliation Commission screenings on television. And what they would do is they would have the oppressors, whomever that was. And I remember watching this as a youngster, I was about 12, 13 years old, and it was televised. And they would have the oppressor. So in the case that I watched, there was this white male farmer. And then they would have the African folks who had been oppressed for whatever reason, right? And often with apartheid, it was for their skin color. And these sessions, the nation would watch and listen to these stories of how the people would commit these atrocities against these African folks. And what was allowed was us to see the pain as a nation, to feel it as a nation. And we were all able to kind of sit in a space of compassion to hear it. And I still get emotional talking about it now. It was such a thing to witness. Some of the stories was really brutal, like someone being dragged behind a car, for example, and losing their life. Mm-hmm. And we had to, as a nation, had to sit. We didn't have to sit, but we sat and listened to these stories. And when we sit and listen and we hold the space for it, that kind of opens up. And I think that's really where the magic happens. We sit in circle and we listen to these stories and we feel what these families felt. And the beautiful thing about that was that these folks who had committed these atrocities, they were not absolved, but they were never kind of, charged for these crimes as such. Mm-hmm. And it's not to say that what they did was acceptable, but it created a space for true compassion. And so I think that's where the inspiration came, and I really first felt connected to compassion. And then at one stage, Erica, my partner, actually, she said, babe, you should kind of look at this modality. It's a modality I'm trained in called Compassion Key by Edward Mannix. And I started doing this work. And Zoran, the moment I get into session with clients, all of a sudden, literally the space opens up and we start to find whatever that limiting belief is. Mm-hmm. And then we literally start to just use phrases of compassion. And because as the powerful creators as we are, we're literally sitting in our power. And as the observer, we're watching whatever that pain is. So in my case, it would have been, I'm so sorry, he chose money over you. And so we're watching that inner child, and we go into a kind of hypnotic, not a hypnotic, but kind of like the quantum space, and we bring that inner child in, and we just offer compassion. And as we do, what happens is, because you're working in the subconscious and not in the conscious, so in neuroscience, they call it the prefrontal cortex, I like to call it the monkey mind. We actually dip into the subconscious and we start to offer these words of compassion. And the cool thing about compassion is that it has an energy that is non-judgmental. It's unconditional love. And it actually has the ability to kind of scooch past that monkey mind, that prefrontal cortex in neuroscience. That's the logical kind of part of your brain. And that's actually where a lot of men tend to operate. But that's only where 10% of our behavior comes from. And it has the ability to kind of move past the lizard mind, which is that amygdala, that fear response, keeping us safe. And it sits down with what I like to call the elephant mind, that old big beast that kind of sits and carries all the stories. And compassion kind of sits down, and we sit and we listen to the story, and we talk to the story, that inner child, whatever happened, and we give it compassion. And the moment that happens, the story starts to transform. And as I did that with my 6-year-old, that story that I started off with in the beginning, she started to change her belief system. And she started to get an understanding, it's not that Dad didn't love me. It was that he was doing what he needed to do at the time. And without Dad having done what he did, I wouldn't be able to swim in a nice pool, because I was like a white privileged kid back in South Africa. I had a swimming pool, I had a beautiful garden, like super cool. But there was that narrative. And so when I started to do the compassion, that compassion allowed me to free that energy up. When as I did that, all of a sudden clients started flooding in and all of that. So that's my own experience. But that's what I then do with clients, is we create that space. We find what the earliest and most intense experience is of whatever underlying belief system is showing up. And just by giving it compassion, by seeing it and often feeling it, and that's been incredible, Zoran, to hold space for men and allow them to actually, I call it just water coming from the eyes. Society calls it crying, But it's a powerful space, and to hold that space for men, to allow them to go through that emotion, feel it, and then it transforms, and that's when the outside world changes. And that's been an absolute honor and privilege to witness in my own world, and then with men as well.
Exactly. And what you were saying, that then the outside world changes forever when you allow yourself to go into that space. This is like a really miraculous transformation that happens. And as you're talking, I'm aware of, you work with business leaders, I work with business leaders, I work with startup entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
With a lot of men who are out in the world and creating something important. I work with people who are passionate about supporting their families. I work with men who are showing up in their communities like yourself, men in governance and so on and so forth. I also run Men Group myself, you and I talked about it.
Yeah.
This is an interesting question to you and to me and for us to explore. What I find out sometimes, especially in the business world, for men to get into that space that you just described, which is a true transformational space of compassion, which I also call unconditional love, like yourself, and really you can absorb and observe yourself and then give yourself permission to transform from inside out. It's something that men sometimes have resistance to do. Sometimes it takes them, when I open up, for example, coaching conversation with leaders, they get like, oh, strong, we project the power, there is no vulnerability, there is no, I cannot be, I need to project my masculine energy. I cannot be destabilized. I need to be strong. I need to keep myself together. I need to la, 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 la. And there is a little bit of that fear. If I allow myself to be vulnerable and compassionate towards myself, that I would collapse and that they will collapse, and they keep on holding. So what do we do with that? And, how do we get people inspired, when they listen to this podcast, to really understand the beauty of opening up and the beauty of getting into the compassionate space and working with somebody like yourself, a mentor, guide, coach, to help them transform. So what would you say on that? Because, sometimes that can be a struggle, what that I'm seeing in the world.
Yeah, and it's undoubtedly a notable struggle. One of my mentors taught me this, Zoran. They said, the teacher appears when the student is ready. And I'm sure you've heard that, right? And through all this work, I've been doing this work since 2010, quite literally. And I came across, when I started to create all my programs and stuff, I figured out this cycle, and it's called the dark night of the soul cycle. And I'm sure you've heard of the dark night of the soul, which is a period in one's life where I like to call it like your soul shifts. So for me, I've had many in my life, but an example might be when a parent dies or a loved one dies, right? So you have that big event and your whole world just kind of slows down and you're like, whoa. And I call it like almost your soul getting thrown up in the air, and then you land on the ground. And that's kind of the first phase of the dark night of the soul cycle. So that's phase number one, the crisis. The second phase is that internal pursuit. Okay. So that's when that fire gets lit. And so that's the only time that fire gets lit, that internal pursuit. It's kind of like when the hero starts walking the hero's journey, right? I can't do anything unless someone has got that fire in them. And how you know that you've got that fire in you is enough is enough. I can't take my kids not connecting with me anymore. I can't take being in a corporate role, and I'm just using this as an example, but whatever the role that it might be, but I know that I need to contribute, I need to do something more. Or I can't be in this relationship anymore. Or I can't not say what I need to say, or I can't handle the addictions anymore, whatever it is. So men have to get, or whomever it is, whether it's me or anyone else, you need to get to that place of enough is enough. And only then, once you step into that, can you then move to the next phase. And the next phase is taking the action. So that's phase 3. Phase 4 is looking at the results. So are the actions that I'm taking getting results? And this is often where I sometimes meet men as well. So they've had that internal pursuit lit. They're like, yes, enough is enough. And then they start doing things like therapy, talk therapy. Now, there's nothing against talk therapy. I've done it a lot. But for men, a lot of men say, it drives me crazy. I hate talking about stuff, Mish, and nothing changes. And I'm like, I know the feeling. I had that as well, right? And therapists are great, and they're really helpful to, to kind of open up the awareness. But for me, it sat in that monkey mind, the prefrontal cortex, and it was only ever changing 10% of the behavior, whilst 90% sits in that subconscious. And so that's why I moved into the coaching space. And so that's the kind of the fourth phase is the results phase. And then the fifth phase is when you move to that higher vibration, that expanded state. And that's what compassion allows us to do, is to kind of break through. And so kind of in answer to your question, I can't do anything until you're ready. But I'm here and I'm creating this space and I'm, sending out the good vibes. And I promise you, you are not too much. And it's a lot of like a big narrative that men run. If I drop things here, it's going to be too much. They can't handle what I've got to say. I'm too much. Yeah. And this is what's really interesting in the compassion sessions is when we start to offer compassion, like, I'm so sorry you feel like you're too much. And the guys hear them, they're like, and something in the energy just starts to soften.
Yeah. And I love what you describe as the 4 steps. And I think it's very important for us to recognize this dark night of the soul, the calling, and how many of us have this throughout our lifetimes, when enough is enough, when there is a, energy of anger, energy of commitment, energy that you need to do something about that. Then when this fire starts burning, and this is the space when you can really dive deeply into the transformation. And sometimes I've seen when people ignore that calling, then that the lives gets a little bit more complicated, right? There's more issues, more problems, more challenges, because simply we're not answering to that call to look into our soul journey as well. So I think that's a very beautiful example of this. Yeah. So when men step into that space of compassion, then they can open up and they can express emotionally. So another thing that I want to ask you, because this is all stereotyping, but it is true, from my experience. I mean, there is new man, old man, this is this whole emotional expression. You mentioned that, we feel, men can feel that we are too much when we really express, because there's a lot of holding of the emotions. I see men, a lot of suppressing, a lot of channeling it through the exercise, release, boxing, over sporting, whatever men do. But there's also this space when men are invited to express their emotions purely and clearly. So what happens in those sessions, in conversations with you, personally, one-on-one in the group, and people are able to voice how they really feel about their life?
So this is also another saying that one of my mentors taught me: when you air it, you clear it. And so we sometimes underestimate the power of our body and the power of our vocal cords, just being able to say whatever it is. And I remember when I first came out of the closet, Zoran, the words, to actually say the words like, I'm gay or I like women, I couldn't, and I was frozen until I did. But there's a special thing that happens when you take ownership and you name whatever it is, because all of a sudden all your power starts to come back in. And that's for me is, I think, the power. And so what happens is I generally haven't, like, just a general conversation. So, Zoran, how are you feeling? Oh, X, Y, and Z's happened, blah, blah, blah. And then in a session, when I do open up the session, we're working in the quantum field, I do get messages. I've had kind of people's younger selves come and speak to me, or their parents or whomever. So that's also quite wild.
Nice.
But I can also feel what they're feeling. And so sometimes I'll name things that they haven't necessarily said, and all of a sudden all they're doing is just repeating after me, right? And I always make sure that my clients understand, I'm not doing the healing, you are. It's your words, it's your feeling. And I think that's the big change as well. So we've had a big shift in there's a big paradigm shift in men having the courage and the bravery to step into that, okay, I actually need to talk about what's going on. But I think also there's needs to be a big shift, and I see that with people now, those way showers or guides. There's no more guru anymore. We're a guide. I'm not doing the healing for you, Zoran. You're doing the healing. And I always emphasize that. And when men hear that, they're like, okay. And all of a sudden, they start to step into their power. And all we're doing is kind of just guiding along the way. So I do have maps, I have blueprints, I have tools, of course, because that allows us to move at speed. Because on a blank canvas, I kind of liken it, I was explaining this to a client the other day. Imagine you're driving a racing car, right? It's cool on a racetrack because you got to slow, you got brakes, you got all that sort of stuff, and you can really have a lot of fun with it, and you learn the dynamics of what it is to be in a racetrack. It's very different when you're in a car and you're driving, you're trying to break the speed barrier or the sound barrier, right? One little stone and you're off, you're dead, and the car's flipped, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what the tools are like. They kind of give you these guidelines to move through the space, but you can move through it at speed. And I think that's the main thing, is when a lot of men that work with me, they're like, wow, Mish, I didn't even know that the moment I integrate whatever it is, like all of a sudden clients are starting to, give more business, or I'm starting to get more responsibility from the CEO. Mish, my daughter came in and she actually wants to hang out with me. So it's these miraculous things that happen afterwards, just from a small shift, that kind of have that heart opening. And then it's kind of, because it's felt in the body, the guys are like, cool, Mish, let's do more. And I'm like, well, are we going for it? Are we going for it? And so it's a beautiful journey to see. And it is, like, I often sit in it, it feels miraculous, but that's kind of what it is,
Is that what you call the anatomy of a miracle, right? That process that you're describing?
So the anatomy of a miracle, again, another process I learned from my Edward Mannix. I've got to name him out on this because it's such a wonderful tool, but it's essentially a blueprint. And what it feels like in business, we do the SWOT analysis, right? The anatomy of a miracle is the similar thing. We've got two quadrants. We've got the external quadrants and the internal quadrants. And what we do is we map different quadrants around limiting beliefs. And I take men through this process in my coaching program, and we'll start to say, okay, what are the causes? What are the effects? Who do I need to become? All these sorts of things. And then we use that as our racing track, right? To guide me as to what themes need to be presented in the clearing sessions. And that's where we do the compassion. And then I give the guys tools along the way. And so that's what the anatomy of the miracle is. It's that blueprint to allow us to move at speed, so that we're just focusing on the things that the men want to transform so that they can get to whatever miracle it is. And it's interesting because I first had resistance around the word miracle, because it's a big claim, right? It's like,
it is, isn't it? Like, magic, miracle. Yeah.
Yeah. But what I found, Zoran, is whatever we focus on, we create. That's a fundamental of reality. And so if we're focusing on a miracle, guess what we're going to create? A miracle. And it then really becomes about what you define as a miracle. And so one of my recent clients, I said to him, what's your miracle? And he was like, Mish, all I want is to be able to walk my daughter to school and for her to dance and laugh again with me, because there was a kind of conflict between the two of them. And she was only 4 years old. And literally, like, this was like 7 weeks into our work together, he sent me a video and he was literally crying. He said, Mish, you won't believe it. Look at this. And there she was, like, dancing and super happy. And he said, Mish, this to me is a miracle. Like this, I've repaired my relationship with my daughter, and this is priceless, And so it depends on what you name a miracle, really.
Yeah. And we all are looking for some other things. And also I wanted to ask you, a question that, I think it's important for men to know, because sometimes we internalize and we believe that we're the only ones who have certain issues. A lot of the men that I've worked with, that it's like, this is only happening to me, it's not happening to anybody else.
No.
So from your perspective, what are the most common issues that men are struggling in their life right now? What do you see in your practice? What do you see in the business world? What do men need to transform right now?
Yeah. So interestingly, a lot of self-worth.
Right.
And, probably women listen to this are like, what? Like, no ways. But genuinely, like, the amount of abuse that I have heard men go through, and it's a big taboo, like they're not allowed to talk about it. Not allowed to, because men don't get abused. That's the narrative. And whether it's sexual, physical, or mental abuse, they have experienced it, and I'm starting to see a lot of that. And so with that comes the self-worth.
Exactly.
And that's been a real thing to untangle, because I've had it as well. I don't think that's gender specific. These limiting beliefs don't sit and go, "Oh, you're a male, I'm going to hang out there, and you're a female, I'm going to hang out there." But self-worth is a big one, and then fear of failure, and that's a big one. What do you think about that in terms of fear of failure? Like, and as a man, I'd love to hear those are the two big ones that I see.
Of course, first of all, I completely agree with what you're saying, the self-worth, which is really interesting, because a lot of men will, not even aware of that, program running behind, there's in subconscious mind, as you said.
No.
And the fear of success or fear of failure, I see both. Like sometimes there is a fear of success. Can I really do this? Am I really allowed? Which is linked to my self-worth. Can I claim that territory? Can I claim that space? It's a big one as well for me, what I'm hearing and seeing from men, again, without them being aware of it. When we say, okay, you're afraid of your success, they're like, what are you talking about? I want to be successful. I want to be, have life. I want to have, my family healthy. I want to have fantastic business. I want to travel. I want to be healthy and wealthy, and so on and so forth. There is fear associated with that. Can I really actualize my potential?
Yeah.
And then this whole fear of failure, for me, it's a big thing for men, being afraid to step into their full power, to really show up, in the world, and not allowing ourselves to fully express ourselves with the full capacity, with our strength, with our power, with the beauty that men are. So I can see that a lot. And then also compliance. I think a lot of men are conditioned in a way to comply to society, and to really keep that compliance, to be good boy, to be a good boy, trained to be a good boy, like behave, uphold the norms, don't stand out, don't show up, they're different, comply. And I saw that also, I have to mention this, in COVID, when COVID was happening, I actually had a much higher expectation of men at that moment in time. I thought that men will rise, they would be much more protective, they would be much more in warrior energy, so to say. They would say, hold on a second, is this really, how can I show up a little bit more for my family, for my society, for my community, I actually thought men will rise at that moment in time as male energy. But I saw the compliance. I saw like comply, uphold, comply. And I would have conversation with my men. They would say, we need to change this. We need to do that. This is unacceptable. Comply, right?
Yeah.
So I see that in my own work, in myself, and in my own work with men, is that's the evolution. I think that something needs to happen with the evolution of the male energy. Move away from that fear-driven, fear of success, fear of failure, and allow ourselves not to comply, and to really show up authentically. Because I think when men are authentic, and as you beautifully said, present to their heart, compassionate to themselves, compassionate to others, then this beauty of that beautiful frequency of the male energy can really, really, really shine through. And then they become outstanding member of community, member of family, they become outstanding men, basically. That's how I see it. Would you agree?
Yeah, 100%. So there's a module that I teach, and I actually got it from a fabulous book for guys who want to read. It's called No More Mr. Nice Guy by Robert Glover. Have you heard of it, Zoran?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
Yeah, magic book. And what that's about is really exactly what you're saying. Like, stop being the nice guy. Set the boundaries. Stop complying. Bring all of yourself to whatever it is that you're wanting to do, be, say, embody, contribute, whatever it is. And it really comes from, that root cause of when we're growing up as babies, we looked at our parents and we had to comply because otherwise we wouldn't get fed and we'd die. Or if I go against the tribe, I'm going to be expelled and rejected from the tribe, and then I'm going to die. And so it's quite primordial, right? And when we start to untangle those, the narrative untangling is like, I'm only lovable when. Yeah, I had that. I'm only lovable when
Right.
I go to university, I find a man, and I, have 3 kids.
Exactly.
That's another program. And so it's dismantling that. But that nice guy syndrome is huge. And so a lot of my clients actually fall into that bracket. And I remember last week, I actually put on one of my clients' Anatomy of a Miracle. I was like, you are allowed to dream, like dream, go for it. Like you're allowed to go for it. I'm giving you permission,
Do it.
Yeah. But, I mean, to step into it, it's kind of like that Indiana Jones
Yeah.
scene, when he's crossing the abyss to get to the grail. You have to have that internal pursuit. You have to have that faith to kind of take that step. And once you do, universe, source, everything comes behind you. But it's that first step that no one else can take from you or for you. And that's the hard part, perceptibly,
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. Mish, we can talk forever. We can talk forever. Some of the podcasts that men, can listen to are 3 hours long. And I've been coached by my podcast editor, like 20 minutes, 80 to 40 minutes. So we're kind of wrapping up, we're close to the end. So as we are kind of moving towards the end, anything that you feel it's important call for action, anything you would love to empower listeners to do as a result of this, or read or engage with you, what would you say it's something that is you would call everybody to respond to as a result of listening to this?
Yeah. So, and Zoran, just thanks for opening up the space for this, because I'm, it's so important. I think take that first step, whatever that step looks like, doesn't really matter. Like I said, the teacher appears when the student is ready. And so if therapy feels right, cool. But don't be discouraged around something not working. Just keep trying. I often say you have to kiss a lot of frogs before you find that prince. Like that's okay. It's part of life. But allow that internal pursuit to drive you. And when you do, I really want men to understand, like, it is safe now for you to be you. And it's safe to step into that because, even though I'm not a part of the heterosexual world, I'm dying for men to step up. Like, we really want you to be supportive. It's the co-creation of coming together. We all need to do this together. And there's a big narrative that women are going to save the world. They're going to change the world. Yeah, the feminine need to come in and express and all of that. But we can't do it without the men. It's not possible. It's not possible. Men have that grounding energy and they get shit done. It's just what they do. And so that's how that I believe need to work together to go and create that new world, a world that becomes so beautiful that you can't help but want to be a part of. And so all the wars, people stop showing up. All the leaders can host those wars, and guys are just going to say, you know what, I'm not getting on the plane. It's not me. I'm going to spend time with my family and community. But ultimately, that choice still rests with that person, and no one else can make that choice. And so that's the invitation from me, is to say, guys, make the choice. Choose you. Choose your family and watch your world transform. And I'm excited because the better it gets, Zoran, the better it gets. And that's what I'm seeing. So that would be my call to men.
Exactly. And the better it gets, the better it gets. And thank you so much for that. I think that's a powerful call for everybody who's listening. I'm super grateful to you for being you and for showing up, in that space. And I think it's such a special energy that you're bringing forward. And, I've learned so much by just talking to you. I'm sure that people who listen to this are going to learn so much. So if you're listening and you want to engage with Mish, we're going to, reference all of her social media, including her TikTok that she just started in this.
Yeah, TikTok's wild. I can't believe it. So yeah, the best place, I've just scaled everything down. I've literally gotten rid of all the websites, everything else. It's going to TikTok, and that's the place to find me now.
Yeah, exactly. So just go to TikTok. I'm going to definitely go to TikTok and find Mish there. And also, thank you so much for coming. All the men who are listening, all the women who are listening, this is also good for you. It's good for you to understand the male energy as well, to understand and support the men in your life, because we can get another podcast, Mish, you and I, about this dynamic between masculine and feminine and how women can show up and become a better partner for men and how they can understand him on a deeper level and what are the expectations. We can cover this in months to come. I would really love to record this with you once again. So thank you so much for coming. Everybody else, thank you so much for tuning in. This is super interesting topic today. I hope that your heart is fulfilled. I hope that you received the transmission from Mish. I definitely did. You know, her energy, her presence, the information she shared with us. It's really, really beautiful. So once again, Mish, thank you so much. And once again, everybody, thank you for tuning in. This is amazing space for you to grow. We love you. We love that you're here with us. We love that you're sharing this podcast with your loved ones as well. Until we meet next time, bar for now. Thank you.
Cheers, Zoran. Lots of love.